Alright, so we're on the final chapter. This chapter, the last chapter of this book, is The Direction Where the Sun Rises. First entry is by J-Hope. 25th of July, year 22. I ran into Yoongi on my way to the practice room from the hospital. I was heading to the practice room without realizing it and stopped. What would I even be able to do there? My ankle had gotten worse. The soft cast had been replaced with a real plaster cast. The doctor scolded me. You shouldn't strain your ankle. But I couldn't sit down while working at the burger joint. I had a lot going on at the practice room too. You have to be extra careful with your ankle. It's been injured before, and it might get damaged permanently unless you take extra care. The doctor kept saying this again and again. I entered onto the main road leading to my house on my crutches. I hadn't gotten home at such an early hour before. I hadn't skipped training without a special reason. I came face to face with Yoongi. He was drunk and staggering at a crosswalk. He didn't recognize me as he brushed past. I turned my head and fixed my eyes on the walk signal. 2 days after my visit to Jungkook at the hospital, I'd gone to Yoongi's workroom. He didn't answer my call, so I just went straight to his workroom. It must have been in the morning because it was before I went to 2-Star Burger. I knocked at the door, but no one responded. The faint sound of music streamed through the door. I thought of calling him again but gave up. I kicked the door instead. I'd known Yoongi since middle school. I knew how his mom had died, how her death had impacted him, and how he struggled afterwards. I tried to be a comforting, reliable friend to him. I laughed off his harsh words and took him around, even though he thought I was annoying. But we were of no importance to him. We thought at least Jungkook must be different. He surely knew what he meant to Jungkook. He's already heard about Jungkook's accident from Jimin, but he didn't come to the hospital. What's worse, a woman who claimed to be his musical partner came up to me out of the blue several days ago. She told me she found me after asking around with everyone. She said that she wasn't able to contact him. The walk signal turned green. I began to cross the crosswalk, staggering myself. I looked back as I bent my steps. I tried not to, but couldn't help it. Yoongi lay on the street in front of a cart selling accessories. The vendor screamed at him as passers-by frowned. When are you going to stop doing this? He looked up at me blankly. Do you think you're the only one going through tough times? Do you think I put on a smile in front of others because my life is all rosy and bright? Tell me, what are you so upset about? Everyone knows you're good at music, and they all willingly put up with you even when you act up. Yes, you must have been in pain since your mom died, I know, but you can't go on like this forever. Aren't you going to make music? Can you live without it? Haven't you been happy even just once because of music? Why didn't you go see Jungkook? Don't you know what you mean to him? Don't you see we're all hurting too? Don't you see that? I didn't mean to push him so hard, but I was really upset. It wasn't entirely because of him. I was upset that I was on crutches. Injuries were inevitable, but also fatal for dancers. I thought I'd be on guard, but I got hurt at an unexpected moment. It was my fault. No one else could be blamed for it. I knew I'd be nervous and conscious of my ankle every time I danced, and that'd make me dispirited, or else I'd get injured again, and yet I couldn't get away from it. I couldn't live without dancing. I had to keep dancing despite being dispirited and injured. It's time to stop running away. If you're going to run away again, don't ever come back. I turned around and crossed the street. Hosup. I thought I heard him calling me, but didn't look back. I'd always blamed myself for everything that went wrong. I'd always thought I should have done this or endured that. I didn't want to live like that anymore. Yoongi on the 25th of July, which was... So this is the same day. I opened my eyes in the middle of the night and it was raining. Curses came out of my mouth automatically as I picked myself up off the ground. I sat still for a while. My entire body was soaked wet with rain. I felt shaky and chilly all over. If you're going to run away again, don't ever come back. Hosok's voice rang in my ears. All I could remember was after leaving Jungkook's hospital was that I continued to falter, bump into things, and fall. Seized by drunkenness, headaches, fear, and despair, I was unaware of how much time had passed or where I was. That's when I came across Hoseok. At that moment, I felt choked up. It was half joy and half relief. For some reason, I believed that he'd be able to understand my confusion and fear even though I couldn't understand myself. But Hoseok looked away. He was pretending not to have seen me. Soon the signal changed and I just stood there watching him walk away. Then someone shoved me and I fell to the ground. I heard people screaming and clicking their tongues at me. "Why didn't you go see Jungkook? Don't you know what you mean to him?" Of course I knew. Maybe that was why I couldn't go into his room. I was distorted and thorny. Anyone who tried to come near me was bound to get hurt. I raised my head and looked onto the desolate mountain trail. There were two directions. I could walk deeper into the mountain or I could turn around and go back. I began to move towards the dark forest. I always took my chances at forks in the road. I had no destination. I'd lost my sense of time. Maybe I was going around in circles. I felt as if my knees would give in any minute because of the biting cold and fatigue. I was out of breath, and my heart was throbbing. What if I just collapsed here and died? Well, if I'm destined to die here, then this is where I'll die. I sank down. Raindrops fell on my face. It was as dark with my eyes open as when they were closed. I was drowning in layers of darkness. I thought of death again and again. I wanted to flee from my fears and desires that continued to haunt me. I wanted to run as far from that terrifying object that I was helplessly drawn to but couldn't look at straight. That agony that pushed me from one extreme to the other. Now must be the time. It was all for the better. I'd inflicted pain in others as I suffered greater pain. I looked away from their wounds. I didn't want to take any responsibility. I didn't want to get involved. That was who I was. This moment must be a blessing for everyone. I blinked slowly and began to doze off. The cold pain and fatigue disappeared, and I became numb to the darkness, the light, and my surroundings. Everything became dim. I opened my eyes again at the sound of a piano. It was silent, except for the sounds of raindrops falling and leaves rustling. Amidst the silence, the fragile and delicate piano sounds continued to drift towards me. Playing the piano in the mountain, deep in the mountain in the middle of the night? I thought it was a hallucination, but it continued. I smirked. It was that melody. That melody I'd tried so hard to recall, that something substantial that was missing, that made me stay up all night for days on end. Why was it coming to me at this moment of all occasions? I concentrated harder, but the tune was still barely audible and distant and interrupted by the sound of rain. I started coughing. I tried to stand up, but stopped. What would I do now even if I could discern the melody? What would change even if I completed my music? I've never wanted to be recognized by others, receive applause, or be famous. I've never wanted to prove myself. Then what would it mean to complete this piece? But I pushed myself up from the ground with one hand and started towards the direction where the sound was coming from. I was staggering and my body was trembling. My face and hands were numb. I couldn't feel my legs. None of my body parts seemed to be under my control, but I took firm steps, one step at a time, to get closer to the melody. Heavy drops of rain struck my head. My shirt was dripping wet. Every joint and muscle seemed to scream. My legs shivered so violently that I couldn't lift my feet from the ground. My feet slipped on the wet grass and thorny twigs brushed against my shoulders. I felt chilled to my core and almost collapsed. My pace grew slower and slower. The piano melody had been subsiding with every step I took. I strenuously quickened my pace to find the source of the music before it stopped. I was afraid that if it did, I would never be able to hear it again. I marched forward, not able to tell the walking trail from the forest. I was struck by dropping branches, then suddenly my knees crumpled and I fell to the ground. I was so out of breath that I felt like throwing up. All my senses came rushing back and I felt the cold, fatigue, and strange surroundings deep in the mountains so vividly. As I quickened my pace more and more, as I hit against more branches, As my feet slipped harder, the piano sound became clearer. The more severe the pain, the louder the sound grew. I finally stopped walking after wandering in rain for hours. The melody was more vividly brought to life. It exploded in my head as it combined with what I'd been composing up until a few days ago. I covered my head with both arms and sank down. It was closer to a raw emotion than music. It stimulated my sense of pain rather than my hearing. It was a combination of suffering, hope, joy, and fear. It was everything that I'd tried so hard to get away from. Suddenly, a scene from one bright sunny afternoon appeared before my eyes. I was playing a tune in front of the piano in my workroom. It was that melody that continued to revolve in my head. Sounds really nice. Jungkook came closer. I chuckled. You always say that. It was not a single melody. It was a combination of various memories. From the days I used to playfully pound in the piano keys as a child. From the days my friends danced in sync with my performance, and the classroom turned storage room. From the days when I stayed up all night writing pieces and inhaled the fresh morning air. My piano was beside me at every happy moment. These happy memories always ended up being shattered to pieces. But they couldn't be denied. What would it mean to complete this piece? I still couldn't find the answer. But there was something that preceded this question and the answer. I wanted to capture all this before it scattered into the air. It wasn't to please anyone or to prove something. It wasn't even for myself. I just wanted to capture this emotion, pain, and fear, which were about to explode in my head and heart with music. It didn't have to signal the beginning of something. It didn't have to mean anything. I just wanted to complete this music. Piano sound was no longer audible. The rain was gradually subsiding, but my body was trembling uncontrollably. I closed my eyes and felt everything surrounding me even more vividly. The raindrops that fell on my cheeks splashed onto the ground and flowed in a stream. Chilly wind, smell of soil, the rustling sound of leaves, and my breathing. When I picked myself up, the sign for the mineral spring came into sight. I thought I'd roamed deeply into the mountain, but I was back where I started, and the path still stretched in two opposite directions. I bent my steps towards the direction where the sun rises. Jimin, 3 days later. I checked the inside of 2-Star Burger. Hosuk was nowhere to be seen. It had been 4 days since he last showed up at the practice room. Someone said he told my dance partner that he'd take a break, but after that he didn't answer anyone's call. He didn't even read the messages posted in the Just Dance group chat. I knew his ankle was bothering him. Maybe it was that night. The night when my dance partner was injured because of me. It had rained that night, and he carried her on his back to the hospital in the rain. His condition must be getting worse. As I stepped into the restaurant, the workers greeted me cheerily. Is Hosuk off today? They said he was sick, on sick leave, probably for 3 weeks, but they weren't sure. His ankle got worse. He had to wear a cast, and the manager recommended that he take some time off. I ran directly to his house. I couldn't wait for the bus to come, so I ran up the sloping road. It was scorching hot that day. My back was dripping with sweat. I darted up the stairs to his rooftop room. The doorknob, heated by the sunlight, was burning hot. It was locked. I left a message in our group chat. Where are you, Hosuk? By the end of the day, he still hadn't replied. Same day, Yoongi's entry. July 28th, year 22. I could finally manage to get up in the afternoon. I suffered from severe chills for 2 days after coming down from the mountain. I couldn't remember any details from those 2 days. I trembled and shivered with fever. Yeah, 'cause you were out in the cold all night, you stingy, stubborn person. I sometimes came back to myself, but quickly lost it again. My sheet was soaking wet. I still felt giddy. I stepped out of my workroom, trying to keep myself steady. I went to the hospital to get an IV and then stuffed food in my mouth, but I threw it all back up. I read Jimin's message while I was rinsing my mouth out in the restroom. Although the number next to the message went down, there were no replies. I walked along the railroad and arrived at the bus stop. There was an unfinished building in the distance. Construction had been halted for months. The music shop was slightly uphill after passing by that building. I stopped in front of the music shop. There was no crackling sound of flames or clumsy, slow piano performance. I didn't have the energy to bend down, pick up a stone, and throw it. The whole thing seemed like distant past and made me wonder if it really happened. I could see piano through the show window. Don't you see? We're all hurting too. Don't you see that? That was what Hoseok said the other day. The memories of that day were all tangled up in my head, but I distinctly remembered that Hoseok was somewhat different. It wasn't the first time that Hoseok had been angry with me. He'd never been on such edge, but he had always pushed, pulled, and encouraged me every time I fell. Why did it feel different? Because he was mad. Like, we haven't seen Hoseok that mad in a while. Or ever, really. I opened Jimin's message again. Where are you, Hoseok? Several hours had passed, but Hoseok hadn't replied. I could see that I let him down. I felt as if something inside me was flopping and thumping around. Hobie often got angry and pushed us, but he never lapsed into silence or looked the other way. He was the one who always paved the way for me to come back no matter how far astray I'd gone. Not this time. It seemed irrevocable this time. It's kind of interesting now everybody's starting to worry about J-Hope. Because, like, J-Hope's, like, the happy guy, so, like, to see that man sad, that would bother me, too. Alright, the 7th of August, year 22, this is Namjoon. So this is a couple of months later, right? Believe, because the last entry was in July 28. Okay, it's like a week and a half later. Okay. Namjoon says, I switched on the light and looked at the flyer that was attached to the door of my container. It read redevelopment and demolition. People must be talking about the redevelopment of this area again. There was always chatter about tearing down the containers lining the railroad and the squatters building across the railroad. I crumpled up the flyer and threw it in the trash can. Talk of the redevelopment didn't begin yesterday, but it always boiled up as if demolition would take place the next day and then subsided after a short while. I put down my bag and lay on the floor. It had been a while since the sun set, but the inside of the container was still hot. Spent every night here after I visited Jungkook. Felt exhausting. My nose bled from time to time when I was washing my face, but I always came here instead of the tiny back room at the gas station. No one else had opened that door and stepped in here. Maybe no one ever would. All those who meet us part without exception. It could have been our turn, but if someone still felt the need for us to be together, I wanted to send him a signal that I was here. I wanted to show him that our hideout was still here and still lit. That's kind of ominous that he says that. So on the 11th of August, Taehyung writes, I came out of the convenience store after finishing my shift. I habitually took out my phone, but there were no missed calls or messages. It was sundown, and the street was full of people busily walking by. I put both hands into my pockets and walked on. A sultry wind swept across the road. I started to sweat after taking a few steps. How much longer was the summer going to last? I kicked the ground, frustrated. I kept walking with my head bent low and stopped in front of a familiar-looking wall. It was the wall where that girl drew her first graffiti. I automatically looked around. Since that night, when I left her in the alley and came out in front of the headlights of the patrol car by myself, I hadn't seen her in my neighborhood. I discovered a large X sprayed over her graffiti as I tried to find her traces. What did it mean? Various images overlapped the X, X'd out a graffiti. The image of her laughing at me when I tried to lie on the railroad and hit my head, and how she got me back up to my feet when I helped her flee and fell. How she lost her temper when I took her bread and ate it. How She looked gloomy every time she passed by the photo studio with family pictures on display. I told her as we prayed, this wall, side by side. Don't think you have to carry the burden alone. Share it with others. A giant X was sprayed over all of those memories. It seemed to scream that they were fake, that they were all lies. I'd never really looked at this wall since that day. I was about to turn around when I discovered a short sentence written in tiny characters under the X. "It's not your fault," was scratched into the wall. It was that girl. I didn't see her write it or recognize her handwriting, but I just knew it's not your fault. Who's that girl? I recalled the day I blindly set off to find Mom. I kept marching frantically, filled with seething resentment, but in the end, I couldn't get anywhere that day. While walking back home empty-handed, I turned my head towards the city where she lived. The city was receding under the light of the day dawning in the east. I felt like crying. Something that had been firmly clinging to seemed to be slipping through my fingers. Lumps of hard feelings noiselessly fell apart. I felt sad and sorrowful, as if I'd given up something that shouldn't be given up. It's not your fault. The sentence reminded me of how I felt at that time. I started walking again. I passed through narrow alleyways and went up and down countless slopes. Finally, my house, Magnolia Mansion, came into view. I climbed the stairs, and when I stood in front of the door, I could hear Dad's heavy breathing and clattering of liquor glasses. I turned around, placed my hands on the guardrail, and looked out. The sun had already set. Its dim red tint wasn't disappearing from the darkening sky. "It's not your fault," I muttered. I took a deep breath, turned around, and went into my house. 12th of August. It's a day later. Hobie's entry says, "Someone shoved my shoulder as I got off the train. I dropped the ticket I was holding. It fell onto the railroad and slipped into one of the cracks. I looked around. It was midsummer when I left, and it was still summer now. The train departed for the next station, stirring up wind. At the end of last month, I left Songju by train from this platform. I watched the city receding out of the window. As far as I could remember, I lived in Songju. I never left the city and never imagined living anywhere else. I went to the burger joint and to the practice room on schedule. After dancing for hours, I went home and crashed. Although the town was small and Songju, I had somewhere I needed to go to, somewhere I needed to be. After my ankle was injured, my daily routine fell apart. I went to work in the practice room wearing a soft cast. The condition of my ankle worsened. With a full cast on, I had to take a sick leave. I had the whole 3 weeks full of nothing. 3 weeks of no work, no dancing, and nowhere to be. It's gotta suck. I managed to get by in the morning on the first day. The rain that poured throughout the night stopped at dawn. I cleaned the house and organized my clothes. I got a haircut and wiped rainwater from the bench in front of my house. But I ran out of things to do in the afternoon. My phone didn't ring. Some messages from my coworkers and the members of Just Dance were all that came in. Still no call or message from the others. Come to think of it, I'd always been the one who contacted the others first. I laid my phone down. I didn't want to contact them first this time. What if none of them sends a message? So be it. I remembered how I'd run into Yoongi the night before. What I blurted out was replayed in my head. I sprang to my feet and shouted into the air. He won't remember anyways. The way home seemed farther than usual after I left Yoongi there. I had to go up the slope on crutches. Although the sun had set, the air felt sultry. It was also humid. I was drenched with sweat when I got home. I didn't regret what I had said to Yoongi. It was time for him to stop indulging in self-pity, but those moments, those words kept coming back to me. On the rooftop, I could look down on the city without me. The train was passing through downtown and disappearing around the corner at the foot of the mountain. I carelessly threw my clothes into a bag and headed for the station. I browsed through the list of cities in front of the ticket office and picked the largest city nearby. I thought it'd be better to move to the large city. Just like that, I left Songju. I got off the train after about 2 hours. As soon as I walked out of the station, I was faced with bustling intersection, rows of high-rises, and people busily walking by under the bright sun came into view. I took the first bus and stopped in front of me. Where should I get off? The driver looked at me like I was speaking nonsense. Passenger who asks his own destination? Yeah, I must have sounded stupid. After about 20 minutes, the bus arrived at a neighborhood that seemed like an old part of town. I put down my bag in a small room attached to a market that had a guest house sign. I stepped outside. I couldn't tell which direction was which. I just roamed around the neighborhood for the first 2 days. There were no high-rises, no brightly lit commercial districts. It was similar to my neighborhood where my rooftop room was on the slope. I'd chosen to leave Songju for the first time in my entire life and arrived at another Songju. Maybe this was why. I tried not to think of the city and people I left behind, but I lost control. I turned on my phone and thought about the others. I might have left Songju, but my mind was still there. On the third day, I decided to venture out further, but in less than 20 minutes after I left the market, my shoulders began to stiffen with my crutches underneath them. Sweat ran down my back under the scorching sun. A red brick building came into view. It was the Citizens Hall. While I was pushing the button on the vending machine, the door of the auditorium opened and several people came out. The sound of music streamed through the open door. I could see a man stretching in one corner of the stage with the spotlights illuminating his head. I was heading into the auditorium before I knew it. As I closed the door behind my back, I was left alone in the darkness and music. I sat down in the closest seat. The sound of music flowed through the air like lapping waves. The man on the stage moved slowly and stretched his legs, ankles, arms, neck, and shoulders, his stretching, which went on for quite a while. It seemed like a piece of choreography itself. Then the music stopped. The man who was sitting on the floor picked himself up and walked to the center of the stage. The stage was immersed in silence for a while. The music started. This time, it came in torrents. The man quickened and slackened his moves to the music. His arms and legs formed not just straight lines and curves, but three-dimensional shapes. One moment led to another through his dynamic moves and gestures. His movements were creating a story that seemed to have no end. He pushed aside the air with his hands and sent reverberations through the ground, which sent adrenaline rushing not to my eyes, but to my mind. Let's move this mic closer just a hair. Hope you guys don't mind. Let's see. The pitch of the music grew louder, lower and lower, and led the man to a greater outburst of emotion. He roared with rage with all his might, caught his breath, and gazed at something far away. His suffering, hope, joy, and fear were conveyed unfiltered. Feelings that I'd never experienced before gushed and whirled inside me. I wasn't aware of how much time had passed. The light of the auditorium was switched on. I just sat there motionless. Someone approached me and asked me to leave because the dancers were rehearsing. Outsiders weren't allowed to stay. The Dance Academy performance poster was attached to the entrance of the Citizens Hall. The man on stage wasn't featured in the poster. The performance was scheduled to take place the day after tomorrow. I came back to the guest house and lay on the wide bench in the backyard. I closed my eyes and thought over those hours at the auditorium. It was my first time to see a real performance in person. It was a whole different experience from what I'd seen through the small window called YouTube. I might have been all the more awestruck because it was so vivid and alive. I retraced each motion and gesture that made my heart pound. At that moment, my phone rang in my pocket. "Where are you, Hobie?" It was Jimin's message. The number next to the message went down gradually, but no other message was posted afterwards. What should I say? I had always explained myself half-jokingly, but I didn't want to this time. It was the first time I hadn't responded to a message directed to me. Our group chat fell into silence. I went to the auditorium at the same time the next day. I hid in the darkness and watched the man's moves. It was the same performance, but it conveyed a different story and different emotions. Who was he? How could he express and convey all those feelings like this? The rehearsal ended. As I stepped into the hallway, I met the man's eyes as he was talking to the staff members way ahead. I bowed without realizing it. A staff member came up to me and said, "Oh, you're the guy from yesterday." The performance took place the next day, but the man wasn't in it. The performance, which had 4 chapters, didn't feature him. The show went on for over an hour, and I applauded and shouted out several times from my seat. But that was it. I couldn't relive that overwhelming moment that boiled in my heart and froze my body. None of it could compare to his amazing moves. Why didn't he join the performance? I paced around the stage after the performance, but there were only staff members and dancers busily tidying up. I came across the performance team again at the train station. I was stepping onto the platform to leave for another city and saw a group of people gathered in the distance. They were obviously having trouble loading stage sets and all sizes of equipment on the train. I didn't have a set purpose when I went over and helped them. It was just that they looked confused and inexperienced, and I was used to arranging and moving things. My cast got in the way, but I was better than most of them who were just standing there flustered. "You're that guy again." I looked around and found that staff member. I didn't even thank you properly. The staff member came to my seat a little while after the train departed. He sank down in the next seat and said about half of the staff had left because things got messed up. He added that they wouldn't have made it without my help. He pointed at my cast and asked if it weren't too much stress on my ankle. I just waved my hand. By the way, that man I saw in the rehearsal, why wasn't he in the performance? He seemed confused at first, then he nodded. "Oh, him. He's our artistic director." Staff member's explanation continued on and on. How he'd once been an acclaimed dancer, how he'd suffered a terrible injury, how he'd undergone years of despair and frustration. Do you know the most amazing part? He surprised everyone and made a comeback as a choreographer and director. But the injury had left a lasting impact. He couldn't perform on stage again. The staff member gave a deep sigh. It was getting dark outside the window. I came to join and tour with the show by coincidence. I helped them unload their baggage on the next station, and my bag got swept away in the process. Fortunately, I had the number of one of the staff members. I got off at the next station, went back to the station they got off at, and headed to their lodging. It was late at night. I was invited to spend the night with the staff. I had breakfast with them the next morning and tagged along to the District Cultural Center, which was their next venue. The staff's proposal to join them and tour together must have been made partly as a joke. I also half-jokingly chimed in. At that moment, his practice began. I watched him blankly, and then I asked them, "Can I really go with you?" I toured around 3 cities with them. We took a bus or train, got off, unpacked at a motel, stuffed food in our mouths, checked the stage at the performance venue, came back to the motel, got on the bus or train again. The man stretched and practiced every day no matter where he was. He never skipped a day, although he wasn't going to perform on stage. I made friends with staff members and the dancers. Their dances and mine were different, but we shared the passion to express what we feel throughout movement. We talked about dancing on the train, and while we waited for the bus, we told one another about our favorite dancers and watched their videos together. I finally got to speak with him when I was showing the staff a video of Just Dance practicing. "You're a dancer?" I looked around and he was standing there. I stood up, stooping slightly. I looked at the man. I was at a loss as to how to answer his question. I was hesitant to admit in front of him that I was also a dancer. "You're a dancer," he said, pointing at me in the video. That's how I first came to talk with him. "Why do you like dancing?" I nervously slurred the end of my sentence. "Well, that is, you know." The man asked me when I first started dancing. I told him it was at a talent show at school when I was about 12 years old. My classmates had dragged me onto the stage. My body began to move automatically. I got even more excited with the clapping and cheering of the audience. I couldn't think of anything else. I just moved spontaneously. After the music ended, I looked ahead, running my fingers through my hair drenched in sweat. I felt as if I'd thrown up all the lumps that were clogging my heart. It felt refreshing and rewarding. It took me a long time to realize how exhilarating it was, and that feeling didn't come from the audience's applause, but from deep within myself. The man pointed at me in the video and said that he liked my movements. Not every dancer can move like this. I watched myself in this video. I liked how I looked when I danced. I could fly into the air off the ground and break free from the eyes and yardsticks of the world. Nothing was important to me except moving my body to the music and communicating my feelings through my body. Off the stage, I was tied down by so many things. I couldn't stay in the air with my feet off the ground. I had to smile and laugh even when I was upset and sad. I used to collapse on the street, taking medication I didn't need. There were moments when I could reveal who I truly was. Moments when I believed I could be happy again. Moments when I could let go of everything that weighed me down and soar high. Moments I could reach heights unimaginable off stage, and dancing gave me those moments. I heard you overcame a serious injury. The man stared at me. I knew I was being rude, but I had to ask him. The man looked down at my cast and opened his mouth. Height is important, but so is depth. You have to hit your bottom. You have to go down until you can't go lower, until you feel as if you'll suffocate from your despair. Then you'll have to escape from it. What is crucial is to discover your driving force. In other words, you have to find what makes you stand firm again. Once you find it, don't ever let go. It can be a person or a desire. It can be evil and disgusting, but stick to it. That was our first and last conversation. The tour continued, but I didn't have another chance to talk with him. I watched him practice every day and thought about what he said. Deeply, my darkest despair. What would make me stand firm again from that despair? Do you live in Songju? The director is also from there. A staff member said this to me when I was looking at a promotional leaflet in the lounge of the train station. The fireworks festival on the shores of, of Yangshan, in Songju, August 30th. As far back as I could remember, I'd seen the festival every year. It was held at the end of every summer. When I was living at the orphanage, we all climbed up on the rooftop and watched the fireworks surging into the night sky and showering back down. After I left the orphanage, I lived in the topmost floor of a multi-household house in the highest neighborhood in Songju. It was the perfect spot for watching the fireworks. Although it was a bit far from the fireworks display, it provided a wide, uninterrupted view. Did you change your mind overnight? A staff member asked me. He was the one who had suggested that I join the staff several days ago. We thought you were reliable and talented. The other staff members agreed enthusiastically. Some even applauded. I almost said yes. I had become attached to them without realizing it. Touring was an arduous job, but I enjoyed every moment of it. Even lying down on the bed at night, moaning and groaning. My ankle would heal gradually as I continued to work with them and stage more performances. Maybe I'd be able to audition and be selected as an official member to get to perform on stage. Maybe I'd be able to receive training from the man and learn more about depth. I'd begun to think this might be where I belong. A staff member told me to sleep on it, and I gave him my answer last night. I thanked him for his suggestion and told him I had to go back. Are you sure? He asked me once again. Picking up my bag, I replied, I have to go get this cast off. I got on the train at the opposite track. I'd arrive at Songju Station in 2 hours. It felt thrilling. Hadn't been pushed to hit my psychological bottom yet. It may never happen. But I'd thought about some moments after the conversation with that man. I won't contact you ever again. You live your own life. Don't ever come back. Maybe Yoongi had hit his bottom that day. HYYH. I turned around and walked on, and he called to me. I didn't look back. I abandoned him when he was suffocating from his own despair. I ran away. Are you okay? I sent this message after much hesitation. The memory of that day had been weighing me down more and more heavily each day. Jimin's message was still posted in the chat. Where are you, HYYH? I sent Yoongi a message in another chat with just the two of us. His reply came at dawn. I woke up startled by the vibration of my phone. Yoongi's name appeared on the screen. He sent a music file. I put it in my earphones and played the file. I listened to his music with my eyes closed, lying on the bed. It was beautiful, and unlike anything he'd ever made. Joy and despair intersected amidst sorrow, and a blue sea stirred beyond a desert. Flowers bloomed and withered, and notes leaped and fell headlong the next minute. It resembled Yoongi. I asked what the title was, but he responded with another question. When are you coming back? The train station at midday was quiet. People carrying large suitcases were coming down onto the platform to take the oncoming train. It reminded me of myself on the day that I'd left. I was wearing what I'd worn that day and carrying a bag of the same weight. But my ankle must have healed. It wasn't the only thing that had healed. I opened our group chat on my phone and posted a message. What's up, my friends? I'm back. How have y'all been? Pretty interesting read on that one. Long read. Okay, what date was that? That's all I'm looking for here. 12th of August. So the next day is the next entry. Alright. J-Hope again on the next day. I dropped by the Just Dance practice room for the first time in a while. I was met with a pounding sound of music, the air filled with the smell of sweat, and a room full of adrenaline. My heart fluttered every time I came here. After a round of loud, noisy greetings from the members, I sat against the wall and watched them practice. When would I be able to dance again? I was both impatient and thrilled. I thought of a man's dance. Would I be able to dance like him someday? That moment, someone came close and sat down next to me. It was that girl. She tapped me on my shoulder, smiling, and said, "Where have you been? Were you having fun all by yourself?" The two of us in the mirror were sitting side by side, leaning against the wall. "How have you been?" She made an expression that seemed to reproach me for such a rhetorical question. I continued gazing at myself in the mirror. Have I told you about my mom? I must have repeated it 100 times, but she always listened to my story enthusiastically. She must be living happily somewhere, right? Then I'm okay. Even if we never meet again, it'd be okay if we were both happy. She stared at me, and I thought you looked like my mom, but you didn't. I've been busy finding this out. She looked confused. I'm kind of confused too, I'm not gonna lie. I chuckled and continued to speak. So when do you depart? No, that's not what I was going to say. Congratulations. It was your dream. She bent her head and raised it again. Sorry, I should have told you first. If you're sorry, buy me a meal. I'll throw you a really nice farewell party later. I deliberately smiled a big smile and made a fuss. Let's meet again someday as famous dancers. Work hard, because I'm not going to let you outdo me. She nodded. The two of us in the mirror sat next to each other, leaning against the wall. Well, at least that conversation ended well. Like, a lot of times those things don't end well, you know? Jin's entry on the year of 22, 15th of August. Starting to, he's a little sus. I saw her for the first time by the railroad. It was about a month ago on a day I had a lot on my mind. I went to see Jungkook at the hospital, but stayed there for only about 10 minutes. I rarely even talked with Jungkook when I was there. For some reason, Jungkook was tense and kept his guard up against me. No message was posted on our group chat. HYYY's message, which said he wouldn't keep in touch anymore, was the last. I felt like that message was aimed at Yoongi, but whenever I read it, it seemed like it was directed at me for some reason. I left the hospital and walked on blindly. I realized after some time that I was in front of the railroad crossings. Crossing bar was down, and I could see a train approaching in the distance. It reminded me of the time when I got on an airplane alone in my childhood. It might sound silly, but it felt similar. What was I expecting? Whatever it was I not supposed to expect something like that? Was that sense of belonging no more than an illusion? What was the emptiness? Was I all alone after all? What did I do wrong? The train of thought continued with some strong winds stirred up by the actual train that passed by, excuse me. The train disappeared from sight as fast as it had approached. The bar went up and the crossing was open again. She walked towards me, swimming against the flow of air. Brought by the train, she dropped her diary as she slid by me. In her diary was her wish list. Taking an Italian class, joining a Temple State program, volunteering at an animal shelter, taking a barista course, that's actually pretty cool, and sharing earphones with her boyfriend while taking a walk. Smeraldo was one of them. So did she have a boyfriend? Or was that like a goal? Underneath the magazine clipping of Smeraldo was the following paragraph. Love is not primarily a relationship to a specific person. It is an attitude, which determines the relatedness of a person to the world as a whole. If I truly love one person, I love all persons. I love the world. I love life. If I can say to somebody else, I love you, I must be able to say, I love in you, everybody. I love through you, the world. I love in you also myself. From The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm. It's a great quote. I did a lot of things with her for 1 month. We took walks, sharing earphones, and listening to music like she wanted, and volunteered together at an animal shelter. That's Jin, smooth player, bro. Okay, we couldn't do a temple stay, but we took a bus and traveled to the last stop and spent time at our favorite cafe. Smeraldo is a flower that is said only to grow in the northern part of Italy. I dropped by a large flower shop nearby, but no one had ever heard of the flower. Then I found this small flower shop still under construction. It was at a corner on the left side after crossing the bridge in Munhyun. Munhyun. I didn't have high expectations when the owner, who had been organizing some documents in the corner, approached me. Upon hearing the flower name, the owner stared at me for a long time and told me he would be able to deliver the flower. Although his shop was not officially open yet, why does it have to be that flower? She didn't know that I had her diary. She'd never be able to imagine that I'd followed the list in her diary for all the things we'd done together over the past month. I didn't return her diary or tell her I had it. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was almost deceiving her. I tried to come clean a few times, but I was afraid. Hold up, before we keep reading, Jin, haven't you learned your lesson yet? You didn't tell the boys what had happened, and you saw what happened with that. Come on, buddy. I was afraid her heart would turn cold once she got a glimpse of my mistakes, wrongdoings, and foolishness and fear. You're using a cheat sheet, bro. Come on. Good intentions, but it doesn't make it right. I wanted to make her happy. I wanted to make her laugh. Every time I made her happy, it felt as if I became a better person. I had just one more thing to prepare. It was a flower that meant the truth untold in the language of flowers. The owner seemed baffled at my request to get a hold of the Smeraldo flower by August 30th, and said it'd be difficult to find one by then. But it had to be that day. A display of fireworks was scheduled to take place in, oh god, that city name, place at the Yangjian stream. She was fond of the night sky. I was thinking of confessing my love for her when the fireworks burst into the night sky. I was thinking of presenting her with her favorite flower, and confiding my heart at her favorite time in her favorite place. Now, no one ever said that Jin wasn't romantic, because he is. He's got some skill going. I can see it. It's in the reading. Taehyung, 29th of August, year 22. It was Hosek's idea to get together to see the fireworks. After his return, our group chat started buzzing and humming again. We told him how we missed him in a reproachful and welcoming manner, and Hobie responded playfully that we should have realized the importance of his existence earlier. Hobie, goofy. Make sure to come for the fireworks. We all said yes. Namjoon would arrive after his shift for his part-time job, and Jin also promised to come, however late, after his appointment. I was reminded of my dream when I saw the message, a woman getting killed in an accident with Jin watching her. Wow, Okay, well, we know that from the video, but that's an intense way to say that. That dream ended with fireworks. White petals of flames poured down from the night sky. I shook my head to dismiss these thoughts. So hold up, what's going on with Tae? Because Tae's like got this ESP thing going on here. Interesting, okay. I shook my head to dismiss these thoughts. The venue of our gathering was Namjoon's container. I sometimes took a walk in its direction when I couldn't sleep at night or when Dad got drunk and acted up. I didn't walk up to the door or stay for long like I used to. I would just turn around and when I passed the train station to catch a glimpse of it. The container was lit every time. I hadn't realized how unusual that was until recently. It was always lit. Even when he must have been asleep, I realized that it was a signal for us to come anytime. I had no way to know. It was just an assumption, but I was confident. Still, I couldn't knock on the door and go right in because I didn't know what to say. The fireworks are tomorrow. I'll be able to make it on time if I leave as soon as I finish my shift. Yoongi's entry on the 30th of August, year 22. What was the last entry? 29th of August, okay. I got off from the bus and strolled along the railroad. Containers emerged from the distance. I saw Taehyung from the bus window on my way here. He was also walking towards the direction of the containers. The others must be coming too. I completed the piece several days ago. I changed the version I sent to Hobie a few more times. I gave it the title Hope. To be honest, the title didn't actually match the piece. It contained my fear, cowardice, and inferiority. It contained all the moments I tried to avoid, get away from, and reprimand myself for it. But I couldn't think of any other word that could encompass it all. Namjoon's container appeared. Someone was standing out in front. His face wasn't visible, but based on his physique, it was Jimin. I stopped and looked around when someone called me from behind. That someone was waving at me in front of the first container. Jin's entry on August 30th. I received a bouquet of Smeraldo flowers at the last minute. It was past the appointed time, and I was looking at my watch impatiently. Fortunately, the delivery truck appeared before she did, and the flower shop owner was driving a truck with the flower Smeraldo logo on the side. Sorry, Fireworks Festival held me up. After the truck left, I discovered there was no card in the bouquet, which I'd ordered with the flowers. I called the owner right away. I'll make a U-turn now. The light just changed. Before the owner finished his sentence, she came into view, walking towards me from an intersection in the distance. Jungkook. Same day. I arrived at the railroad really early. The air had cooled down after the sunset, and it was dark. I thought of going into the container, but decided to sit on one corner of the platform across the railroad. It had been a while since we all met. A mixed feeling outweighed joy and expectation. I was constantly reminded of the day of the accident. Jimin was the first to arrive at the container. He opened the door, checked inside, but didn't go in. I jumped off the platform and crossed the railroad again. Yoongi appeared at that moment, walking slowly with his eyes fixed to the ground, and looked back. There was Hobie behind him, loaded down with bags in both hands. I felt uneasy and agitated. I was excited to meet them, but I couldn't just enjoy the moment. I'd been waiting for so long for this moment, but wanted to turn around at the same time. The first set of fireworks burst into the air without warning. The white flames surged into the middle of the night sky and exploded into millions of sparkling, blazing petals with a big popping sound. Okay, I'm guessing this is a continuation because it's the same date by the same person, by Jin. It says continuation after the U-turn. The delivery truck came to a sudden stop after making a U-turn. Its headlights flashed. I stood there helplessly amidst the scene of crashing, bouncing, and falling. I couldn't hear or feel anything for a moment. It was the summer, but the wind felt chilly. Then I heard something hitting and rolling on the road. The fragrance of flowers tickled my nose. I came back to reality. The bouquet of Smeraldo flowers fell from my hand. She was laying in the middle of the road. Blood began to spread out from underneath her tasseled hair. Dark red blood flowed down the road. With a loud pop, the first set of fireworks burst into the air and into the night sky in the distance. Somewhere, I heard a mirror crack. Cracked mirrors everywhere. And that is the end of that chapter. Supposedly the end of the book. I'm going to record this epilogue nightmare after I go check out to see if it's in line with the rest of the book or if it's an additive. So I'll be back with the rest of it in a minute, you guys. Alright guys, so we're at the epilogue. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what an epilogue is after the fact. It means like there's lots of ways you can use an epilogue. In this particular instance, this is an entry that was on the same day as multiple entries within the story, but for some reason they tagged it at the end of the book instead of including it with the rest. So we're gonna go ahead and read it, and then we should be done with the notes. So this is the last piece, you guys. This is called Epilogue Nightmare. Taehyung's entry of the 11th of April in year 22. And remember, Taehyung didn't really have any entry on the 11th of April, so this is the piece that was missing. It was dawn when I awoke. Dad's familiar smell and snore streamed from his room. Murky air on the other side of the piece of translucent glass inserted into the front door ruffled. It took only 3 steps from the narrow entrance where shoes were scattered all over the master bedroom. I'd begun to sleep there since I don't know when. I felt a pressure on my back and shoulders as I picked myself up. I stepped outside with a glass of water in my hand and carelessly slipped into any shoes and walked slowly. I passed the police station, alley, and pedestrian overpass, and the railroad beyond came into sight. It was before the sunrise, and the street was immersed in silence with no cars out yet. Someone's vomit from earlier in the night reeked. I walked along the railroad. 1, 2, 3, 4. I stopped in front of the 4th container from the end. It was Namjoon's. I reached out for the doorknob and came to a halt. Namjoon must be asleep now, and what I saw last night in my dream must be nothing more than a nightmare. I took a sip of water and turned around. The dilapidated station and railroad, abandoned houses, and trees and weeds that were growing haphazardly in between. A black plastic bag rolled towards me and then flew into the air. It was a poor neighborhood. In my dream, the area was enveloped in flames. The entire scene seemed to shimmer and wave. Maybe it was because of the heat, or maybe it was because I was dreaming. Someone's scream, some kind of crashing sound, and the sound of crying, and the sound of something crumbling all came together and flooded my mind. The images that shimmered in the far distance suddenly drew near at full speed. I felt nauseous and shut my eyes, but it was a dream. I couldn't get rid of them by shutting my eyes. My gaze first blocked by flames, pushed through people standing with their backs to me the next minute, and then stopped suddenly. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th container was Namjoon's. The door had fallen off. There were blood stains. Flames surged inside. People stepped aside one after another. The floor came into view. Namjoon was lying there. Someone blurted out, "He's dead." I opened my eyes to find the ceiling of my house. I could hear Dad snore. It was all a dream. My palm hurt suddenly. I turned on the cold tap water and held out my palm. It felt numb under the jet of water. I filled a cup with water and drank it. It was a dream. A nightmare. So super ominous ending to a very good story. Not even, it's kind of like, flashback essentially. But guys, I hope that you all enjoyed reading the notes with me. If you're new and it's your first time, I hope you enjoyed learning along with me. And if you're a returning person, just kind of watching to see if you missed anything, I appreciate you hanging out. We are going to move into a theory vid next, and I will jump in and give my summary on what I think is going on in the book, and what I think might actually be happening between the story of the notes versus the videos, because obviously things don't align perfectly, but we'll get into that. And I hope you enjoyed everything. I hope you guys enjoy what's to come. We have that my theory vid, and then the webtoon, and then we'll be caught up with everybody and moving on with the rest of this journey, the easier parts of this journey, the fun parts, super fun parts of this journey. This has been a great experience, but we're going to be moving forward with everything else. And I appreciate you guys for hanging out with me today. Y'all stay safe, y'all stay healthy, and I will check you guys in the next one. See you soon.